And we are going to move on to our next speaker, who in some respects needs no introduction. She is one of our co-hosts, Dr. Caroline Tully. And I remember going to an Irish music festival once where the musicians were presented as needing no introduction, and then they didn't introduce them, and I had no idea who any of these people were. So I'm going to introduce her anyway. So Dr. Caroline Tully is an honorary fellow at the School of Historical and Philosophical Studies at the University of Melbourne. Her research interests include religion and ritual in the Aegean Bronze Age, reception of the ancient world, and contemporary paganisms. She is the author of The Cultic Life of Trees in the Prehistoric Aegean, Levant, Egypt, and Cyprus. And today she's going to be speaking to us about Moon and Huntress, Frazer's Arician Diana in Italian American Witchcraft. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay. Italian American witchcraft, known as Strega, is a form of modern pagan witchcraft founded in the late 1980s by the prolific American Wiccan writer Gary Charles Erb, known as Raven Grimassi, author of over 20 popular how-to books, some of which are pictured here. Grimassi sought to provide a spiritual lineage for contemporary pagan practitioners of Southern European descent that bypassed British-derived Wicca, founded by Gerald Brousseau Gardner in the early 50s, and its perceived focus on Northwestern European paganism. To this end, Grimassi constructed a history that foregrounded Mediterranean paganism, particularly ancient Greek, Etruscan, and Roman religions, aspects of which he claimed survived the centuries of Christian religious hegemony to reappear in the present day as a coherent contemporary pagan religious belief and practice. While proposing to elucidate a Mediterranean/Aegean cult of the great goddess that dated back to the Neolithic period, Grimassi's Italian witchcraft religion was primarily an elaboration of the Roman cult of the goddess Diana at Lake Nemi near Ariccia in Italy, as described in the 1922 abridged edition of James Frazer's magnum opus, The Golden Bough. The Roman goddess Diana was the patroness of the wild landscape, the moon, night, hunting, crossroads, and the underworld. She was the protector of women in childbirth and, among the archaic Latins, a warrior's goddess and the guarantor of leadership and authority. Her sanctuary at Ariccia, 26 kilometres southeast of Rome, was concerned with healing, the obstetric health of both humans and dogs, particularly hunting dogs, the care of infants, and the training of young people and dogs, especially for hunting. In her role as a protector of childbirth, Diana was called Diana Lucina. Probably originally a Numen of the sacred grove, the moon and hunting. By the 6th century BCE, Diana was syncretized with the Greek goddess Artemis, adopting her iconography and mythology. Like Artemis, Diana is usually depicted in art wearing a women's chiton shortened to facilitate mobility during hunting, with a hunting bow and quiver and often accompanied by hunting dogs. The worship of Diana at Nemi can be traced back to the Bronze Age and lasted until the 2nd century CE. Diana's sanctuary began as a woodland grove overlooking Lake Nemi, where she was worshipped as Diana Nemorensis, or Diana of the Wood. The cult of Diana Nemorensis was thought to be ancient and barbaric. Its mythological origins attribute its founding to figures well known from Greek mythology, either Orestes and Iphigenia or Hippolytus. Diana's feast day was the Nemoralia, which was held once a year at Nemi on the Ides of August, which is August 13th to 15th. The Temple of Diana was erected around 300 BCE inside the extinct volcano on the shore of Lake Nemi and evolved into a grand Hellenistic-style complex that attracted scores of pilgrims and the sick. At the height of its popularity, the sanctuary covered an area of around 45,000 square metres. While there were various cultic officials working in the sanctuary, the most famous was the Rex Nemorensis. The Rex Nemorensis, his name means King of the Wood, was always an escaped slave who could only obtain the position of priest by defeating his predecessor in a fight to the death. First, the challenger had to pluck a golden branch from a sacred tree in the sanctuary, and this gave him the right to challenge the current Rex Nemorensis in armed combat. If the slave prevailed, he became the next king for as long as he could defeat his challengers. It was in order to understand the role of the Rex Nemorensis at Nemi that Frazer wrote The Golden Bough. The sanctuary of Diana at Nemi is ground zero for Raven Grimassi's Strega religion. Grimassi claims that the ancient Roman cult personnel and visitors to the sanctuary of Diana were witches. In his opinion, witchcraft was the name used for the old pre-Christian religion of Europe. This idea is dependent on Egyptologist Margaret Murray's assertion in her book The Witch Cult in Western Europe from 1921, that those accused as witches during the European witch hunt were really just pagans, members of what she described as a Dianic cult that worshipped a goddess Diana and a god Dianus, deity names obtained from Frazer, whose influence on many aspects of her work is evident. Grimassi echoes Murray by calling the religion of Diana Nemorensis a Dianic cult. He elaborated on this by alleging that the sanctuary at Nemi was a special sacred site for witches that nurtured and safeguarded what he termed the old religion of witchcraft. This old religion of witchcraft was distinguished from Roman religion in general, he explained, because the sophisticated urban Romans disdained it as a backward country religion. Here, Grimassi implicitly evokes the original Latin use of the term pagan, or paganus, to mean rustic, as though the cult of Diana was somehow separate from the Religio Romana, when in fact the goddess had been one of the deconsentes, the 12 major deities of Rome, since the beginning of the 4th century BCE. In Grimassi's construction of the Strega religion, he specifically uses the 1922 abridged edition of Frazer's Golden Bough as his source information on the worship of Diana. This edition is much more easily available than previous multi-volume editions, as well as being more accessible than the ancient Greek and Latin sources that discuss the cult and the archaeological reports elucidating its surviving material culture. In addition, Grimassi was also aware that Frazer was an intellectual authority whose ideas were relevant to Wicca. The abridged edition of the Golden Bough omits much of the archaeological information on the site of Nemi included in the 3rd edition, which mentions that the sanctuary was wealthy, with an abundance of votive offerings ranging from the humble to the extravagant, that included gifts from foreign rulers. It was surrounded by luxurious villas. Monuments to Roman emperors were erected on the site, and the Emperor Caligula even had 2 floating palaces on the sanctuary lake. Left primarily with Frazer's description of the Rex Nemorensis and the associated mythology of the site in the 1922 edition, interpreting Diana's cult as a self-contained rustic witches' religion still required Grimassi to leap wildly beyond the evidence into the realm of invention and fantasy. Not only was Diana's sanctuary of Aricia the centre of a witches' religion in ancient Latium, but it continued to be a sacred site and pilgrimage centre for witches in subsequent centuries, according to Grimassi. Grimassi sets the scene for this underground, orally transmitted witch religion by explaining that as a result of Rome outlawing magical practices, the priestesses of Arician Diana, who were really witches, retreated into the nearby village, perhaps the village of Nemi, to nurture their witch religion in secret. As time went by, he explained, witches of old worshipped the goddess Diana and her consort, the god Dianus, Outside Rome, in the Alban Hills region, they gathered in the ruins of the sanctuary of Diana at Lake Nemi. And it's this religion that has come down to practitioners of Stregaria, or Italian American witchcraft today. Grimassi confidently proclaims that modern Strega are the descendants of those witches who once gathered beneath the full moon at Lake Nemi. Relying only on the abridged edition of the Golden Bough, except for citing Horace's Epode 17 as proof that writers in Italy were commonly addressing witches as followers of Diana, Grimassi uses Frazer to support his claim of an oral tradition of Italian witchcraft, of which he is the custodian, despite the fact that it was not Frazer who said that worshippers of Diana were witches, but Margaret Murray. Witches in Frazer are the malevolent folkloric type, not ancient pagans. If what Frazer says doesn't really match up with Grimassi's claims, no matter. Frazer can't be expected to know the secret tradition of Stregaria. Grimassi seizes upon what is convenient in Frazer, such as his discussion of the fire altar of Vesta, which is part of Diana's sanctuary, interpreting it as the prototype for his claim for a deliberate method of oral transmission of the Strega religion by the domestic fireside. In addition to expecting readers to believe that he's the beneficiary of oral tradition that survived through 2,000 years, Grimassi makes claims about the practices and material culture of Nemi that are not recorded either in the archaeology or by the ancient authors, and certainly not by Frazer, and invents various beliefs that the witches of Nemi had about the moon, about death, and about the types of initiation rituals they underwent. Grimassi reinterprets the sacred tree and the golden bough, which the challenger to the Rex Nemorensis had to pluck in order to be able to formally engage in armed combat against the priest. He claims that rather than a tree, it was really a built structure, a moon portal, constructed from 2 upright pillars of wood, which supported a crossbeam, forming a doorway through which the witches would pass into the lunar realm. The golden bough becomes lanterns or oil lamps hanging off this structure, providing a presumably golden light. The Rex Nemorensis is the hooded one, part of a threefold male deity who guards this moon portal and must be defeated in order for the witches to achieve enlightenment. Grimassi also places ritual objects used in contemporary Stregoria back in time at Nemi, describing their evolution through time until they manifest in their present form. He even places Aradia, a folkloric figure deriving from the biblical Herodias and associated with Diana in medieval folk beliefs about night-flying women who visited houses to bless or curse them, at Nemi in an effort to link Charles Godfrey Leland's 1899 book Aradia or the Gospel of the Witches with Roman Diana. At Nemi, according to Grimassi, Aradia receives spiritual revelations, initiation into the old religion of witchcraft, and lives in outlaw camps in the Alban Hills, where she's a messianic figure with devoted followers who worship Diana. In his construction of Stregoria, Grimassi also uses the Frazerian concept of the sacred marriage, within which the goddess Diana and her priest, the Rex Nemorensis, representing the Frazerian god Dianus, feature as the exemplars whose coupling makes the earth fertile. The sacred marriage is one of the core concepts in British Wicca, and while deriving from Frazer's Diana and Dianus, Grimassi is under the impression that Frazer is confirming a pre-existing ancient practice and subsequently his Italian version by tracing it to Arician Diana. So reliant is Grimassi on Frazer that in his 1995 book Ways of the Strega, a whole chapter is dedicated to Frazer's contribution to the old religion, along with Charles Godfrey Leland and Gerald Gardner in an unholy trinity of witch fathers. He praises Frazer for highlighting the role of the Divine King, which, he asserts, is one of the fundamental teachings in the Western mystery tradition and an integral part of Western occultism, as though the Divine King was part of Western occultism before Frazer. Grimassi was not the first Wiccan to seize upon Arician Diana and her associated mythological and cultic figures as an ancient example of the witch religion. As Ronald Hutton mentioned 2 days ago, prominent British Wiccan Alex Sanders's witch name was Verbius, a misspelling of Virbius, which is a forest god associate of Diana at Aricia. An early challenger to Gerald Gardner's brand of Wicca, Charles Cardell, went under the name of Rex Nemorensis. And additional concepts deriving from Frazer, such as the sacred sacrificed king, the dying and rising god, and the fire festivals, are embedded within the structure of Wicca. Raven Grimassi incorporated and disseminated what appeared to be evocative, authentic evidence for an original witch cult that was Italian rather than British. If anything, he argued, British Wicca was simply a pale imitative shadow of ancient Mediterranean witchcraft. Grimassi's use of Frazer is part of his project of demonstrating that Italian witchcraft precedes British Wicca. In Ways of the Strega, he introduces readers to, and I quote, the proud heritage of Southern Europe, where the roots of witchcraft today can be uncovered throughout Italy in the unfragmented traditions of the Strega, the old religion. Those of Southern European heritage can be proud of their culture's gift of Strega to the world. A tradition of antiquity and mystery, Strega has been passed down through Italian family lines for centuries. Steeped in moon magic, the craft of Italian witchcraft was sown amid great civilizations such as the Etruscan and Roman empires, evolving harmoniously with the people of Italy. When other European people were still living in primitive dwellings, great cities and temples adorned the Italian landscape. Northern and Western Europeans were still considered barbarian when in Italy, shamanism had already evolved into a religion which in turn evolved into other mystery traditions, end quote. In order to trace this Italian witchcraft religion up to the present day, as Sabina Magliocco has shown, Grimassi weaves the Roman cult of Diana Nemorensis into the later reports of women who flew at night in the company of Diana and Herodias, Italian witch trial material, the witch's walnut tree at Benevento, Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg's research on the Benandanti and the shamanic origin of the witch's Sabbath, with Charles Godfrey Leland's book Aradia and his other Italian-oriented works, Etruscan Roman Remains and Legends of Florence, and up to the present, or up to Grimassi's publishing anyway, which ceased with his death in 2019. Grimassi attempts to demonstrate the precedence of Italian witchcraft and relocate the origin of British Wicca within Italy, or Italian, really Roman culture. He suggests that the Roman occupation of Britain infused Italian paganism into Celtic religion, and that the mysteries of Wicca may have been brought to Britain by the Romans. That the Roman Italian religion of Diana and Dionysus was the origin of Arthurian myth, and that the Rex Nemorensis and Egeria, a water nymph associated with Diana, can be equated with King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake. That Italian paganism influenced Druidic religion, bardic song, and Irish mythology. Grimassi explains that because at a much earlier date the civilizations of the Mediterranean were more technologically advanced than those of Northern and Western Europe, Celtic mythological figures, the Tuatha De Danann, known for their superior weapons, were actually a Dianic-like cult who migrated to the British Isles from the Mediterranean or Aegean region. Grimassi laments that while Frazer was, I quote, originally quite popular amongst Wiccans in the 1950s and 60s, these days his research and insights into the ancient mysteries is now overlooked by modern writers on Wicca. Since the Golden Bough deals largely with ancient paganism in Italy, it is possible that the Celtic interests of most modern Wiccans have diverted their attention, end quote. For Grimassi, even Frazer's fire festivals, which form the basis of the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, were really Italian. In order to construct a coherent, Italian, unbroken, secret, hereditary tradition of witchcraft, or the old religion, Grimassi uses Frazer's own method of horizontal hopping and vertical connecting of a blather of different cultures and practices together through wide spans of space and time, and fits it all into a Wiccan structure. Nevertheless, by utilising Frazer's Diana of Aricia as a bridge between ancient Roman religion and modern Italian-American witchcraft, Grimassi circumvented British Wiccan authority and exclusivity, its closed, seemingly impenetrable membership, and its perceived role as arbiter of what is authentic, acceptable, real witchcraft. Grimassi's presentation of the figure of Diana Nemorensis provides apparent authentication and validation, not to mention pride, for contemporary pagans of Italian descent, as well as other witchcraft practitioners outside of British traditional Wicca, within what is a fiercely competitive spiritual arena. Thank you.